What's up, Dwayne Nation? This is your host, Justin Paez, alongside Genoa Agudelo. And a Super Bowl we got to see this past weekend. Started out a little slow. Some people might have been a little bored, through the first half of the game. But man, once the second half hit, it was fireworks. It was absolute fireworks. Just it was super exciting watch. Genoa, how you doing? And give me your thoughts on, just from the Super Bowl.
Yo, Dewey Nation. What a Super Bowl we had, Justin, on Sunday night in Vegas. I believe now these were the best two teams in the league, no doubt, this past year in 2023. And you know what, Justin? Even though I picked the wrong team to win, I was rooting for the wrong team that did not win. I love CMC. However, this was one of the best Super Bowls of all time. When you look at last year's Super Bowl against Philly, Justin, I think this game triumphs it. It takes over it. And going into overtime for the second time in NFL history, in Super Bowl history, man, Justin, what a game we had. And I am so excited to break it down and just, take this Super win as we say goodbye to another NFL season. There's another one in the books, Justin. We're going to be getting ready in the next couple of weeks for the road to next year's Super Bowl in New Orleans, Justin. That's going to be fun. Hopefully we are there. I'm praying. But here's the thing, Justin. It was a great game, and let's just get to it, man. I'm so excited to break it down.
Yes, super excited to get started with it. First off, I do want to preface this. Our hearts are out to everybody from the Chiefs parade with the shooting that happened there. Hopefully all the families, prayers to them and prayers to the people that were lost. So we're here to cover football, but we understand just how big, an event like that and just that, things need to change, but we're here to talk about this
Absolutely.
football game. And so, I just kind of want to roll through it a little bit. We saw, it was 0-0 after the first quarter. It was only 10-3 at half, and we just saw it was pretty sluggish, I'd say. The defenses were carrying both sides of the ball through the first half, but then things changed in the second half. We finally saw Mahomes, turn it on. We saw Kelsey get angry at Andy Reid. They must be really tight because friends that aren't that tight probably would not be friends after that, confrontation. But hey, maybe it kind of put a fire under Kelsey's butt, and he ended the game. He was one catch for 1 yard through one half, and then had
Yeah.
8 more catches in the second half for over 90 yards. So, a big turnaround for the Chiefs. Mahomes, just another classic Mahomes performance. He put up 333 and 2 scores. He did have a bad pick, kind of his only mistake throughout the entire playoffs, in my opinion. And, just big plays to, again, no names. They got rid of Tyreek Hill 2 seasons ago, and now have won back-to-back Super Bowls. It's baffling. It's mind-boggling. But I kind of can only put it on and credit to Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid leading this team. Tell me what what was the biggest surprise of the game?
Justin, I have no idea where to start off, but let's just start off with the MVP of the game. 25-22 was the final score in overtime, Justin, in Vegas. And when you break it all down, there's many layers. We've got to get into all of it. But number one on my list is Patrick Mahomes here. The MVP of the game, absolutely converted on every single play the Chiefs needed. When it mattered the most, when the chips were all pushed into the center of the table, Justin, Patrick Mahomes delivered, and he delivered, and then some. Looking into the end of this game, right? Like you mentioned, it was a slow start. I think halftime was 10-3. It seemed like, 49ers need to score, and hey, we're there. We'll get to the 49ers second. I have a lot to say for the 49ers, but just looking at Patrick Mahomes, Justin, one of the plays that stands out to me is fourth down leading to the field goal drive to send it to overtime, Justin. It was 4th and 1, and I think they did a little play action fake. It looked like they were going to dump it off to Kelsey to the right, but Patrick Mahomes makes the play and gets about a 15-yard gain with about a minute and 12 left. Patrick Mahomes was unbelievable in this game. If you know me, Tom Brady is forever my GOAT. He is my Michael Jordan. He will forever be the GOAT. But what Patrick Mahomes did in Vegas Sunday night, Justin, it's just so heartbreaking if you're a 49ers fan because you're on the other side of greatness. Like Patrick Mahomes now is officially, Justin, a top 2 quarterback. I was saying in the past couple weeks leading to these playoffs, Joe Montana second and Patrick Mahomes and Peyton Manning are like neck and neck. It's over now, Justin. I mean, Peyton Manning does have 4 or 5 MVPs, but in the playoffs, Peyton Manning doesn't lay a candle to what Patrick Mahomes has done in just 6 years as a starter. It's as a football fan, it's beautiful to see. It's a new era in football. This is not Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees or Big Ben or Phillip Rivers. That era is gone. It's in the past. We are in a new era of football. This is a shotgun pass play, first, but this is just a new era in football now, and it's Patrick Mahomes' time, Justin. And when the Chiefs needed it, play in and play out, they got it, and that's why they're Super Bowl champions.
And you brought up that play on that fourth down where, I mean, maybe most teams would logically be like, it's a yard, it's half a yard, give it to the running back to plow through, but you can't. And that on that big of a stage, you rely on your best player. They did that. They gave it to Mahomes. He took it himself. He gets a first down. He leads his team to a Super Bowl victory. I do want to get your take on something else that's been very controversial from the Super Bowl, but from overtime, there's new rules this season, and it seemed as if the Niners didn't know what the new overtime rules were, and they took the ball to the happiness of the Chiefs. They were like, oh, they took the ball, yes. I kind of view it. I mean, some people are getting on them a little too hard on it. I don't see it as such a big thing. I guess you could say if you get the ball second, you kind of have 4 downs every go because if the other team scored, you're going to have to score your drive. So I guess I see it on that side, but I don't think that was such a big deal. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Justin, I feel like when you go into overtime, the Super Bowl is on the line. You have to be aggressive. And Kyle Shanahan was aggressive in different parts of the game where he needed to be. It was very opposite for Kyle Shanahan. But I do agree with him to tell, I think he told Fred Warner to, hey, if we are able to receive, let's go for it. And I like that because you just got to go out there and punch him in the mouth, go up, and then trust your defense. I'm good with that. So I'm going to take the 49ers side of it. Now, I love the way the Chiefs handled it. I mean, what can they do? They're going to get the ball. So hey, it's you got to look at it from a different way though. When the Falcons lost the Super Bowl in overtime, Justin, the Patriots got the ball, and Matt Ryan never saw daylight in overtime. So, um, you know, it goes both ways. I know that the rules are changed, but I'm going to side with Shanahan here though on receiving. But
Yeah.
what happened happened.
Right. What happened happened. They couldn't get a stop. They put up a field goal. It's not like they put up absolutely nothing. And then just they feel like Shanahan's getting a lot of crap now, being 0-3 in Super Bowls. That he can't do it. But I mean, this team has arguably been the best team the past 2 seasons. They just had an injury in the NFC Championship last season, and then here in a close overtime game, they just aren't on the right side of history. So I think that he's getting a little bit overhated. I don't think any of the Niners played bad per se. I mean, Purdy just had like a fine game. McCaffrey was kind of halted, only had 3.6 yards a carry, had 22 carries for 80 yards. But I mean, they were giving it to their best player, McCaffrey. The Chiefs had a good plan on stopping him. I mean, he had 8 catches and a score. Jawan Jennings really was kind of the underlying hero for them. 2 touchdowns, one through the air and one receiving, which only other guy to do that was Nick Foles in his Super Bowl with the Philly special. Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, we didn't see big games from Kittle, Samuel, or Brandon Ayuk. I mean, Kittle had
Yeah.
2 catches for 4 yards. That's not a superstar type of number, and I guess maybe you could put that on coaching scheme wise, but maybe I credit it more to the Chiefs' defensive scheme. Do you have any worries about next season with the Niners, with just the kind of a turmoil it's kind of sounding like down there?
Yeah, Justin, I have a slight worry for the 49ers. I saw a stat earlier this morning, Justin, that apparently the last 7 to 18 starting quarterbacks that lost their debut Super Bowl matchup has never made it back. Guys like Cam Newton, like Matt Ryan. I know Jared Goff still has a chance to get back, but he has not been back. Guys like Jake Delhomme, who did it for the Panthers in 2004. Guys like Steve McNair and Chris Chandler for the Falcons years and years ago. I can keep going. But apparently, yeah, Purdy falls into that category. So that's one thing that kind of worries me. History sometimes repeated itself as it did this playoffs, Justin, as you predicted that, it happens. Also, I feel like with Ayuk, there's been news around him this week. Is he going to stay? I think his girlfriend or wife or something said, we might be done here. And now you look at Kittle. I mean, is Kittle aging before our eyes? Before Travis Kelce could ever? Kittle was absolutely just, we can add a second, but I still think he's a great tight end. Not saying I'm not going to draft him in fantasy or whatnot, Justin, but in the long run, I'm not really too sure about Kittle and Debo. He didn't really have a top wide receiver one game as they needed in the best year. I think in the best game of the year. Excuse me. And Christian McCaffrey's going to be a top star, but this is his first year that he didn't really miss a game. Justin, he was missing games over and over in Carolina. So we'll see. Kyle Shanahan now is a little bit on the hot seat for me. I feel like when you look at what the Broncos did years ago, Justin, they had John Fox as their head coach. They went to the Super Bowl with that record-breaking offense, and they got beat by Seattle. And 2 years later, John Elway says, we're going to go a different direction. Goes with Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips with a defensive scheme, which Shanahan really isn't, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl. So you got to mention this is a pretty decent team, but I'm not really sure what to expect from them next year. What do you think?
I don't think it's a collapse is in sight for them. Kyle Shanahan is a top five head coach in the league, in my opinion, still.
Yeah.
They got rid of Steve Wilkes, so maybe the defense will look even, better. Even though I thought they were pretty good this year, they had a very good first half against the Chiefs and a very good second half against the Lions. So I know their metrics went down a bit. After losing D'Amico Ryans, which that would make sense. He got a head coaching gig in Houston and showed out. So their defense, fell off a little bit compared to last year, but they were still a very solid defense. With George Kittle, it's hard and it's weird because we consider him as such a superstar, but he is very inconsistent. We've seen that through, just about every season he's been
Yeah.
part of the inconsistencies. And I think also a big thing that you mentioned was McCaffrey's, he's been healthy since he's been on the Niners, which has not usually been his style. Just like,
Yeah.
he's been more injury prone, especially in Carolina. I know he's surrounded by a better offensive line and more weapons, kind of, put that off, but he's still getting a huge workload. So injuries are always could always be lingering around his name, and being fully healthy in an NFL season is not common for just about anybody, but for him particularly. So there's
True.
definitely seeds of something that will make it hard for them to come back to the Super Bowl. But in the NFC, with they have Philly, who's kind of they got two new coordinators, so they're questionable there, and Detroit, they can maybe run it back, with Ben Johnson coming back. But other than that, the Cowboys are always fighting around there. But there's not a super scary team in the NFC that makes me think that the Niners don't have probably the biggest chance to come back out of that conference. So I
Yeah.
think there's both sides to it for sure. And then on the
Mhm.
Chiefs side, I kind of want to throw out that I think this might be like just the tip of the iceberg of what they are capable of. So I know that Andy Reid's going to be around a handful more years. I think Kelsey's going to stick it out until he can't. I think at least a couple years, it seems to
Mhm.
me. So they're in a good spot to me. I know that you just won a Super Bowl, but I think they're in a great spot to. They're still going to bring in another wide receiver this offseason. It's clear on that. I think you can't go through another season with Richie James and everybody besides Rashee Rice and Kelsey. So they're going to get another receiver in that offense, maybe through the draft and like Keon Coleman or something like that, or a big name in T Higgins if they can make money for him.
Yeah.
And then we saw in the parade, actually, Chris Jones said he's going nowhere. So
Mhm.
he's staying, which is huge for that team. I thought he might be out of town. Maybe a Texans team could have picked him up, but he said he's going nowhere. So it looks like there's probably a deal in the works in Kansas City with Chris Jones. So they're setting up to be just very strong for a long time, in my opinion. But yeah, that's our outlooks on this after the Super Bowl, after just a great game. Honestly, I agree. Probably, over the last decade, easily top three, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting game from the onset, and it was always close. One second I was like, I think the Niners are going to pull away, and then another second I was like,
No,
you can't count them out. You can't count the Chiefs out. So it was crazy. It was crazy, and I don't mean to pat myself on the back. I was very close in the score here. Last week if y'all listened to it, I said 24-21 Chiefs. The ending
you
score was
did.
1 point shifted 25-22. So
Justin, can I say something? I did call Moody missing an extra point, Justin. I did call that. So I knew he was going to miss an extra point. And Justin, that was, if you think about it, Justin, that might have been the reason why the Chiefs won. They had two things that went their way. The 49ers punt, I think the punt was touched by one of the legs. And then I don't know who it was that couldn't, I think it was Richie James or something that couldn't recover
wow.
the contact of the fumble. And then, Justin, the extra point, which this is interesting now. Maybe the 49ers play different defensively with the 4-point lead when Mahomes gets the ball back with, I think he got at the end of the fourth to tie the game. He got what, like a minute 30?
Something like that.
Um, yeah. And so that, if you think about it, what if, 150 left? I'm looking at right here. 150 left of the Super Bowl. Mahomes had the ball, which is kind of stupid. Shanahan, why do you give the ball back to Mahomes? I mean, I don't know. Anyways, but yeah, that might have been the game changer as well, that extra point. So I did call that Jake Moody. So it's time to get rid of him. Now time for a new coach, kicker next year.
But yeah. So I mean, just so much that went into this game. Now we're really officially in off-season mode. It's still like honestly off-season. I mean, it's not the season. It doesn't have the same exact feel as watching all your guys play out on the field. But the off-season is such an exciting period. Over the next couple of weeks, we're gonna dive into just we call it performance reviews here. We're gonna discuss some of the players throughout the past season, discuss how their season went through, how it panned out, and how we think going into next season we our thoughts on them. And then of course after that, I mean the free agency is coming right around the corner as well as the draft, and then schedule release, and then I mean by the time it is going to be the season again. So much content ready to roll, and we want to dive in quickly into our daily Dween Sports news. Just a couple things that I think are important that we bring out. That the Bengals, there's rumors that the Bengals are planning on franchise tagging T. Higgins, which is I mean that was a thought probably from a lot of people. A lot of people thought maybe he'll leave and get a big contract elsewhere, but the Bengals are looking to win a Super Bowl next year, and I could see that being a tag. If they tag him, do you think he's going to have a big season with Cincinnati, or would you rather him find a new place?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm Cincinnati, I got to keep this core together. This is the reason why we made the Super Bowl now 3 years ago, I believe. So you got to look at it this way: to beat Kansas City, to beat that team, you got to outscore them. You just got to have the weapon. You got to make the plays. Purdy unfortunately couldn't make it, but I think Burrow can because he has beat Mahomes once in the playoffs. So you have to keep that core that brought you to the Super Bowl. Add around pieces. You're going to have to get maybe develop Brown, the backup running back, though, because Mixon's probably getting a little up there in age. Maybe get a pretty good tight end. I think they have pretty good wide receivers. They developed that really well. If you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Joe Burrow, you always have a chance. So if I'm Cincinnati, definitely got to keep that core together, and I love it going forward. Don't let T. Higgins go. Give him, obviously the old franchise. He'll be there for one more year. And if he has a great year, obviously keep that core together. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not sure if Cincinnati would do it. I've heard they're really cheap with their owner. It's like a mom and pop shop type franchise. So I hope they do it.
And another thing to point out is that Tyler Boyd is also a free agent for this team. They don't
Mhm.
have an alpha tight end to throw to, so if they let T. Higgins go, I can't see them honestly wanting Tyler. I mean, Tyler Boyd's fine, but if you're going to pay up for Tyler Boyd, might as well kind of divvy it up and try to get T. Higgins to stay instead.
Yeah,
And then they have the draft. They have the 18th overall pick, but they also kind of need O line still. And so they have
absolutely.
some issues coming into this offseason that could change a lot. Another question, I think that is a very cool one that I'd like to get your answer on is the Chiefs, being the Super Bowl champs, they get to host opening Thursday night this season again. And so I want to get your thoughts on who are they going to open the season with. So let me get you who they're hosting this year. So I know they get the Bengals at home this year. That's a favorite maybe to open up the season with. They also get the Ravens, who they just beat in the AFC Championship. They got the Texans at home this year,
Ooh.
another big game. They get the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh. They got Sean Payton and the Broncos with a new quarterback probably in town, or Jarrett Stidham. I don't know. They got the Raiders with Antonio Pierce. And they got let me think here. They got the Saints. So they got some options, but I want to hear who would you think is the most exciting, opening night, Thursday night football to open up the 2024 season.
Man, it's hands down Cincinnati. I would love to see healthy Joe Burrow and T. Higgins back with Jamar Chase and to see what they do offensively, like how they add and build around Joe Burrow. I did see something today that Joe Burrow feels, 100% he's near it. So I think by September and week one, opening night, Joe Burrow will definitely be ready to go. So it's definitely Cincinnati. I don't think it will be my Texans because when Kansas City won their first Super Bowl, they opened it up that following year. I think that was pandemic year when I think it was Deshaun Watson's final year in Houston. So I don't think it'll be Houston. It's definitely Cincinnati, my pick. But I think a dark horse to look at is two teams, and they're divisional. It'll be the Chargers, Jim Harbaugh's debut in the NFL, back from college, fresh off a natty winning head coach versus Super Bowl winning head coach Andy Reid, one on one Thursday night to after banner night. So that would be one. And lastly would be, hey, where they celebrated at. So it'd be home against Vegas. Hey, I celebrate in your town. Why don't you come over week one and try to spoil banner night as well? So those are three teams I like to look at. I'm not really sure what their NFC teams are looking like, but since they opened up this year against Detroit, maybe they just go an AFC matchup.
And I think I mean I've listened to people and they talked about how maybe the Texans opening the season with the Chiefs is kind of that same vibe as the Lions opening up with the Chiefs last season, kind of a upcoming
Mm.
team that people are really excited about. And even we saw the Lions win that game.
Huh?
So that's why a lot of people think like the Texans coming into this one, but maybe they don't want to run with the same kind of vibe and they pick another team that we've seen the Chiefs lose to, which is an interesting storyline with, the Bengals beating them to go to the Super Bowl a handful of years ago. So I do think it will be the Bengals, but Texans are probably my close number two in that regard. So yeah, that's kind of just the news. Kind of wanted to cover just some interesting things that we'd like to talk about. But now we're going to get into our newest segment, a segment that's going to be a staple on the show for the next couple of weeks. It's called Performance Reviews. Dwayne Sports and Dwayne Nation, I want y'all to hear about this. We're going to talk about the top 10 quarterbacks from 2023, and we're just going to discuss, how their season played out, their consistency. Where do we think that, this is something that can translate into next season? Because, we got to draft, we got to make rankings, and it's important to look back into the past in order to, find the future. So we're going to start
Mhm.
out with the QB1 of 2023. And he was, the kind of the consensus QB1 coming into the season, Josh Allen. He ended as the quarterback one, you know, for the people, we do scoring as we have, a bonus if you get over 300 yards, and we do 6-point touchdowns in a half PPR league, just so people can know. But so yeah, Josh Allen was the QB1, 28 points per game, outstanding. He had a little bit of interception problems early on in the season. He had three in the first game against the Jets, and then, it was kind of sprinkled in throughout the year. He's known for not being, the most accurate guy, a little turnover happy, but he's just so electric, on the ground as well as just a touchdown scorer. So, what are your thoughts? He's probably going to be, quarterback one heading into next year. So, do you think anything that could change that or, help that?
Uh, I'm a little down on Josh Allen just because the way him and Diggs ended off this year. I mean, the last, 8 games literally, Justin, were just abysmal. Just sad. I mean, even in the playoffs, Diggs was just sad. It's just tough to see him go down. I don't know if he'll probably be with Buffalo next year. So I'm a little down with Josh Allen. Obviously, Josh Allen is a great quarterback. If you can get him another wide receiver one, Buffalo is still, I'm not really too high on Buffalo going into next year, but I still think they can maybe win the division. I'm not too sure what a playoff threat. I do agree with you that this past year, Josh Allen did pretty good. They lost some games because of their defense. They were like at 6-6. They had that heartbreaking loss in Philly, and then Buffalo just took off from there, winning their division, just absolutely embarrassing Miami last week of this regular season. They won a playoff game, and then you know how they went out against Kansas City. It was really Tyler Bassett's fault. So who knows? Maybe Buffalo can build back. I'm still when you have Josh Allen and Sean McDermott. You're always going to have a chance to win the division and make the playoffs. But I'm a little down on them. Just offensively, it didn't really look promising. But I do like James Cook. You got to look at the positives. James Cook, Dalton Kincaid. I'm not sure if Dawson Knox is a free agent, Justin. I'm not really sure if Gabe Davis is. We can probably break it down later. But they just got to add some new wide receiver talent. It needs a fresh start as far as wide receivers in Buffalo.
Yeah, so I do know that Gabe Davis is a free agent heading into this offseason. And, I feel like they've always had an up and down. So I think he might be out of town, out of Buffalo, which leaves them without
Mhm.
a wide receiver, too. And then you talked about Diggs. If he, maybe requests a trade or they just decide to move from him with money issues and maybe, locker room issues, I don't know. So he could be out of town. And Josh Allen could be out of, top tier wide receivers to throw to. I mean, Khalil
Yeah,
Shakir and Dalton Kincaid aren't going to get it done. So he could kind of falter a little, but he still has that rushing upside that makes me think for
yeah,
fantasy, he's probably still going to be just fine. But we'd like for him to have some more pieces to throw to in that offense because that's he's an offensive guy like being super he's got a huge arm cannon and they don't run the ball that often. So yeah, for him to kind of keep up those numbers, we'd like to see him have some good pieces around him. So yeah, there's definitely some things to discuss more as as free agency hits and stuff like that, and see if the Bills make any moves. So yeah, Josh Allen, still a quarterback one. So I going to next season, I'm not like all out. I mean, I guess it depends where his ADP is and where he lands in drafts. If he's a second rounder, I probably won't touch him. But maybe past that, he could be a very valuable piece because at least in our league with 6 point touchdowns, having a quarterback that can score just about all the touchdowns for his team is very huge for putting up fantasy points. So yeah,
Mhm.
there's Josh Allen. Now, number two, somebody that I think you had, pretty high hopes for coming into this year. I remember in our big league, I think you drafted him, Dak Prescott.
Mhm.
He had,
Yeah.
maybe a slower start to the season, but I mean, once week 6 hit, it was just the best quarterback in the league, arguably. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on Dak Prescott from this past season?
Yeah, I love Dak Prescott. I mean, I remember the first 5 weeks he was a little up and down, and whatnot. But then he just took off. I remember, I think he after the bye, they were on a Monday night in LA versus the Chargers, and Dak made some pretty impressive plays, and he had really great games after that. Two against Philly, and that one home game against the Giants, where I think he had like 55 fantasy points for me, Justin, that week. Dak Prescott was so good this year, and I like him going into next year. You have CeeDee Lamb, you have the emergence of Jake Ferguson. I don't know if Gallup's a free agent. He could be. I'm not too sure. I think they should maybe keep Brandon Cooks. But one thing I've noticed about the Dallas Cowboys, Justin, under Mike McCarthy, they were able to really develop really good wide receivers as well as running backs. I mean, you did see Tony Pollard have a pretty decent, not crazy fantasy, but yet did it good enough because they were just in shootouts. They were just throw. Even Rico Daldo, I think I'm saying that right. He was pretty solid, and so Deuce Vaughn could be something, hopefully. So I like Dallas offensively going into next year. I love Dak as a fantasy quarterback. He could be considered top 5 just because in the shootouts they're always in. You look at the Dallas Cowboys, they're always in, always on primetime television, sometimes always behind. So Dak has to play comeback, as we saw against Green Bay, Justin, where Dak ended up with like 400 something yards to bring the Cowboys in within reach, hopefully against that Packers team, and even though they ended up losing. So games like that, Justin, is what makes Dak Prescott a great, quarterback sometimes, as well as when he's won some few games this year, also winning the division for the Cowboys. So Dak Prescott is on my pretty good list going into next year. I like the Cowboys. They did get Mike Zimmer as the defensive coordinator. Maybe they can be good next year. But I hope you mentioned Philly along the way because you know how much I love Jalen Hurts,
Oh,
Justin.
we definitely will dive into Jalen Hurts. He might be next on the list. Might be spoiling something. But I mean, I just want to get into how much I think Dak Prescott is. He had a pretty phenomenal season. I mean, looking at this game log, starting in week 8, I mean, 304-4, then 374-3, 404-4, 331-4, 299-3. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal. And I
Hmm.
think, Mike McCarthy's coaching for his job next year. In
Oh yeah.
in Mike McCarthy's first year, kind of calling the plays for this offense, what a level, that Dak Prescott and the Dallas offense, went to. Now, I do want to point out, this season they couldn't run the ball that much. Tony Pollard was pretty ineffective. I don't know if it's due to the O-line or just himself not being that workhorse back. And I do think, their struggles running the ball led to Dak throwing it more, and, just relying on your best player in CeeDee Lamb. So I think, maybe next season, the Cowboys, either pick up a star running back in free agency like Derrick Henry or Josh Jacobs, or they tip their toe in the draft and get a guy like Jonathan Brooks from Texas or Braylon Allen from Wisconsin or something like that that could really give them a new edge. But that would kind of hurt Dak's value, I think, and make them running the ball more and giving more touchdowns to the running back. So there's definitely something that could hinder the numbers that he has going to next year. But I think, Stephon Gilmore is a free agent as well going into next year. If they lose him, maybe the cornerback room is a little bit more depleted with, Trayvon Diggs coming off an ACL, and Deron Brand is pretty good, but he had his moments too where he was getting burnt. So if the defense struggles a little bit more, they're going to need Dak. But if the running back improves, then Dak could be used a little less. So there's definitely some things that will change over the next few months that can change our thoughts on him. But he had, I mean, just an outstanding season. Arguably could have been the MVP of the NFL. If he didn't, I don't know, just maybe the stigma around him. Maybe if he didn't, falter to the Miami game where they lost and the Buffalo
Yeah.
loss. The Buffalo loss was probably the worst one, but just
Hmm.
he had a great year. I definitely think he might go a little under the radar again. Not as much as last season, but probably go in that 6 to 8 to 9 range of quarterbacks. And that might be that sweet spot to scoop him up in the 6th round in your draft. So I'm liking his value. That makes me more interested. And now another guy, our next guy that we're going to dive into, somebody that, definitely struggled more than, his close to MVP season last year, but was still the quarterback 3. It was Jalen Hurts, as you were mentioning, just an awesome fantasy player. First and foremost, with his rushing ability, with that tush push for those, record-breaking amount of touchdowns he had this year on the ground. So Jalen Hurts comes in at 3. He had a more interception-prone season, but just arguably was one of the most consistent fantasy quarterbacks from this past year. What are your thoughts on Jalen Hurts from this year and going into next year?
Justin, you know how much I love Jalen Hurts. I do think the way they ended this year was very ugly. But if I had to put a blame on somebody, I'm gonna give it to was it Ben Johnson?
Brian Johnson, Brian.
Brian Johnson. Okay, I get confused with the two. Brian Johnson, who is now gone, now being replaced. Um, so Kellen Moore, he could be really great. He can elevate this offense to more of a passing offense. You can obviously keep the tush pushing if you're at the 1 yard line because it works well for you, as well as it does for fantasy. Justin, we love when we have Jalen Hurts and we see, oh my goodness, we're at the 1 yard line. Give me those 4 or 6 points uh, for fantasy. So looking for the Eagles and for Jalen Hurts, I love Jalen Hurts going to next year. I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a redemption year. I think this year coming off the Super Bowl, I think everybody kind of just boosted them. Okay, they're going to be good, and then they really fell off the face of this earth in the last 4 to 5 weeks. Justin had a just ugly playoff loss in Tampa. But looking at Jalen Hurts going to next year, I believe in Jalen Hurts. This guy is a winner. This guy eventually is going to win a Super Bowl. Hopefully, it's my Texans first, but eventually Jalen Hurts will win a Super Bowl for the city of Philadelphia. They have a great offense right now. They have AJ Brown in his prime, Devonta Smith, who I loved. He still has some great games here and there. Eventually, he's going to pop off. So I do like Waddle. I like Goddard, who they signed for the next couple of years. And that running game, Justin, is always so well with Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. They've always had some pretty great running games. Even last year, before they got Swift, they had some out of Gainwell and out of Miles Sanders. So when you look into next year for the Eagles, I do think they're going to have a little bit of an upgraded running game. I still think they should have Swift, and as we talked about a couple weeks ago, Justin, adding Derrick Henry. So when you have that team, and also we're not sure if Jason Kelsey is or not going to retire, but if he does, like you've mentioned, this O line is still really good, a top 5 to 7 O line in the NFL. So I love the Eagles going into next year. You know, the Cowboys won last year, this division. So I think this year the Eagles can get back with the Giants and Commanders. We're not feeling too good about them, Justin. We do like Dallas next year, but with Philly next year, I do like Jalen Hurts to have a bounce back season on the field in fantasy. And I think Sirianni can and Kellen Moore can add some more plays for Jalen Hurts and make this Philly offense really dangerous next year, Justin.
Yeah, I there's a lot of storylines and a lot of, changing parts with Philadelphia that could definitely leave you, just uncertain about, what they could bring next year, new play caller who we've seen had success. Like he had success early on in the season with the Chargers. It ended more sour, but that was due to maybe the personnel on the field with all the injuries. And then in Dallas, he always had very strong offenses, number one outputs from the Dallas Cowboys. So that makes me excited. Now, another thing that could maybe alter some things is the tush push talk about being banned by the NFL. That could, take off, a good chunk of those touchdowns that Hurts had. I think he could have had a total of 18 touchdowns, and I think maybe 12 to 14 of those were from the 1 yard line. So if there's no tush push, there's no 1 yard line push unless they want to do it from the two, or they might just get rid of that whole formation. So that could leave him a little less fantasy points. But the thing that I've looked at it, through watching Eagles games and just through the coaching talk, I'm pretty confident they're adding a third wide receiver to this room. Their third wide receiver for the past handful of years, it was Quez Watkins or Olamide Zaccheaus. I can't even say his name right.
Yeah,
So that's not somebody very reliable. And if one of those guys get injured, then the offense can become pretty stagnant. So I think I'm pretty confident in the draft. They're going to address that. Try to get a guy like Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, or, maybe, an Aggie like Anais Smith could be a good, slot, fill in. So, yeah. So I think they're going to address it there, and that would help Hurts a lot going into next year. But overall, I mean, through it, I know the tush push talk, but I like the offensive coordinator change, and I like, the promise of maybe another guy there to throw the ball to. So I like Hurts a lot. I know Dak, we just talked about Dak finished over him. I'm still going to rank Hurts higher, probably due to the rushing numbers, is a big part of it. So we like Hurts. We saw, a pretty tough year for him football wise, but in fantasy, he was still the quarterback 3. I mean, you look at their losing streak. They played from San Francisco just about to the end of the season. That's where things kind of took a turn for the worse. I mean, he still put up 25. Then he had a bad game with 8, but then 22, 30, 25. I mean, they still, they lost those games, yes, and the team didn't look super pretty, but he was still putting up good fantasy numbers. So that leaves me pretty certain that he's going to have a very good season this year. So I like Hurts. We like Hurts. But the next guy is the guy who actually won the MVP. Lamar Jackson was the quarterback, number 4. And it wasn't to me, it also wasn't a pretty season, but with that rushing upside and with how he ended the year, he vaulted himself up to quarterback 5 and it got him an MVP trophy. So do you think next year's kind of going to look the same? He's going to have, those good games, those big blowout games, or do you think it could be better or worse?
I love Lamar Jackson going into next year, Justin, as well, mainly for fantasy. When you look at the Baltimore Ravens, they just lost in the AFC Championship. They couldn't score over 10 points. So when you look at what the Ravens do now, they just lost their defensive coordinator, who's the new head coach in Seattle. Now you have to look at Baltimore and say, if you're their organization, you are confident they are going to have a pretty decent defense, as they always had in the history of Baltimore Ravens. However, you need to add something on offense. So I feel like the Ravens now are like, okay, we have Zay Flowers, we have Mark Andrews. We're not really sure what we're going to get out of Bateman and Odell. And Duvernay, who I love from the University of Texas. However, we're going to need to add some superstar playmakers in this draft, possibly in free agency, make a couple trades. The running game is always going to be solid when you have Lamar Jackson. They have goal line, bona fide running backs that score easily off the 2 or 3 yard line. The running game's always been good in Baltimore. So I think now they're going to have to elevate this offense with now two-time MVP Lamar Jackson. They're going to have to give him some weapons now, Justin, okay? You can't beat Kansas City with the same receiving core. I love Odell Beckham Jr., but you're just not going to get a big game from him when you need him the most. And especially now, the Baltimore Ravens know how it feels like to lose an AFC championship on their home turf. I think now, Justin, they're going to look to add a little bit more offensive talent. Mark Andrews and likely are two great tight ends that they can build on. Add a couple good young talent, maybe a veteran free agency, a wide receiver out of free agency. And I do think, Justin, Lamar Jackson has an even better season now that the Ravens now are – think about this, Justin. They're going to be competing now in that division with hopefully a healthy Joe Burrow, with a hopefully healthy Deshaun Watson. And whatever Pittsburgh does, Justin, if they can get a quarterback with TJ Watt and that pretty decent offense they got, and they have a new offensive coordinator kind of in Arthur Smith. We don't really know. We'll break it down later. But hey, if the Steelers can get a quarterback, hey, that's a 4-team division that's solid from top to bottom. So Baltimore has to realize this was their past year, but they cannot go into next year, Justin, with that same receiving core because they are not going to knock off the reigning champion Kansas City Chiefs. I just don't see it happening.
And I think it's important to point out they lose Mike McDonald. They lose their DB coach, and I believe their inside linebacker coach. They lost a lot of defensive, good, like well-written schemes. And I'm looking at their free agent list: Jadeveon Clowney, Geno Stone, Justin Matabuke. If they lose that, the defense can be on a kind of a shaky defense, and that would equate to more offense for the Ravens, more need to kind of put up some high numbers and stop relying on the run game as much. Because there were games where Baltimore dominated. I was trying to remember. I think it was the Arizona game. They dominated. You would think that must have been a Lamar game. No, it was Gus Edwards. I think he had 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns that game. So
Yeah.
they were relying on the running backs a lot. J.K. Dobbins is a free agent, which I know he didn't play much last year, but if they just let him walk and keep, Gus Edwards and maybe Keaton Mitchell comes back from injury, Gus Edwards is fine, but, I think they might need to rely on that, passing game more. I'm looking here too. They have 4 of their wide receivers are free agents. So OBJ, free agent, as we talked about, he's washed. I don't know. They might bring him back because of how well known he is and he wants to play again, but he's not a game changer. Nelson Aguilar is not a game changer, and he's a free agent. So is Laquan Treadwell and Devin Duvernay, as you mentioned. They're free agents. So they're definitely going to need to bring in another guy. Bateman, he was a first rounder. He's not, a first round talent. Clearly, he's not a guy you can rely on.
No.
I do like Zay Flowers a lot, and I do like Mark Andrews, but bringing in a wide receiver, I think they should bring in a known wide receiver. Try to get a guy like, Mike Evans would be a good one to run late in his career. But there's definitely a need to change there. Kevin Zeitler is their, offensive guard. He's been a pretty good player for them. He's a free agent. If he moves away from them, that could hurt, his value with the O-line kind of becoming more shaky.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of free agents, which is an interesting point that we need to, kind of bring to light because I'm looking here. Oh my gosh, Gus Edwards is a free agent. So they need to, bring some people back, maybe let some people go
Yeah.
and new people. But there's a lot of changes going on in Baltimore. But as we mentioned with a guy like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, that rushing upside will always make you a very strong fantasy player. And we've always known Lamar's never been a 300-yard passing guy. He, in fact, got his first 300-yard passing game this season. So there's a lot of changes happening in Baltimore. But as long as Lamar's still running, which he's going to, I like him as a top 5, top 6 fantasy quarterback. Do you have the same thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lamar Jackson is definitely a top 3 fantasy quarterback going into next year. I have confidence in this Ravens organization to add talent, Justin. I just can't stress this enough. Baltimore needs some elite weapons, specifically wide receiver. If they can do that, I can trust Baltimore to have a pretty decent defense going into next year, going into the playoffs next year on the road to New Orleans, Justin. I'm so confident they just need offense. They just need some wide receiver playmakers to Lamar Jackson. And you know what? I love Baltimore again next year. They're going to be in a tough division, like I mentioned. So, hey, Baltimore will be back in the mix, and so will Lamar Jackson.
And we talked about this, and I remember we didn't talk about this in Dwayne Sports Daily News. The rumors of Justin Fields to Pittsburgh. Have you heard them? I mean, I've been hearing the chirps. Um, I think that's a very interesting idea.
I
Maybe
love it.
put in a challenge for Pickett. Hopefully, he starts over Pickett, and that offense could really change under just a new quarterback, a much better quarterback. Because I know the Steelers, they don't want to, but I think they're gonna. They feel probably owed to Kenny Pickett to give him one more year. But if they follow through on the rumors of Fields, that could be something crazy. What are your thoughts? What if Fields is a Pittsburgh Steeler?
I would absolutely go for that if I'm Pittsburgh, Justin. I'm not really confident when I see in Kenny Pickett. When you look at a quarterback like C.J. Stroud, who showed you a spark off the back, and even Anthony Richardson, who only played 4 to 5 games, he showed you a spark. We're still going to put a little bit of a weight on Bryce Young because we know what his situation was. But with Kenny Pickett, Justin, in the past couple of years, he has not been great. And I love what I've seen out of Justin Fields. Now, I honestly don't understand the Justin Fields slander. Justin, he was a great quarterback at the Ohio State, took him to the national championship. He beat Trevor Lawrence in a college football playoff game, Justin. And the NFL, he's been a pretty good fantasy quarterback. He's had some tremendous runs out of 40, 50 plus yards. I think he's second only under Lamar Jackson and possibly Josh Allen fantasy wise. I'm a big Justin Fields fan. I honestly don't see the slander with him. A lot of people just talk bad about him, but I think he's good than I would say 50 to 60% of other quarterbacks starting in the NFL. Justin Fields is better than him. I'm sorry. I still believe Justin Fields can be a great, exceptional fantasy quarterback, Justin. 2 seasons ago, not this past season, but 2 seasons ago, he had a pretty late stretch where he was good and he was kind of like a fantasy league winner. And then this past season, he had a pretty rough start with Chicago, but late in the season, he sort of turned it up, and the Bears won some games, and that is the reason why Matt Eberflus was able to keep his job. And so I do like Justin Fields, though. If he goes to Pittsburgh, can you imagine with Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, who I'm still high on? Pat Fryermuth is pretty decent at tight end. They have Jalen Warren, and they have Najee Harris, who are pretty, somewhat good backs. And maybe Arthur Smith, Justin, could be a good offensive coordinator. Maybe he's a terrible coach, but maybe he's like a Josh McDaniels, Justin. That's just a pretty good, offensive coordinator. Arthur Smith was pretty good in Tennessee with Mike Vrabel as offensive coordinator, but I like him maybe in Pittsburgh. So I like Justin Fields. And if I'm Pittsburgh, Justin, I'm going for that trade because you're in a division with Joe Burrow and Deshaun Watson and, hey, the MVP Lamar Jackson. And, hey, and even if Deshaun Watson doesn't play next year for some weird reason, hey, you can always call back Joe Flacco, who's a familiar foe in that division. So if I'm the Steelers, definitely go for Justin Fields and do not look back. The first round pick, trade for it is absolutely worth it.
You're speaking to the choir here. Like, I want the Steelers to listen to us right now. Pull the trigger on Justin Fields. And to be honest, this is my thoughts through looking at what the Bears are going to put out next year. I think the Bears are going to stink next year.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
I'm not a fan of Matt Eberflus. I'm not a fan of their new offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron. I don't know if you saw that, but JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was, he's the wide receiver for the Seahawks. He worked under Shane Waldron last year. He got interviewed, and they were like, "What are your thoughts on Shane Waldron as the new offensive coordinator for the Bears?" And JSN froze and gave this, and he goes, "Are we live?" He clearly didn't like what Shane Waldron was putting out there. Neither do I. I mean, we saw.
Are we live?
I'm not gonna credit him with Geno Smith's, resurrection. I give that more to Dave Canales because he was the quarterback's coach there at the time, and so I'm not a big fan of the Bears. And I don't want to, send Caleb Williams to his doom, but it's either him or Fields is going to have a poor season because they're on the Bears. So I like the idea of Fields going to Pittsburgh, kind of giving them a new edge because Pickett isn't good. We see
Yeah.
what a terrible quarterback class that was. Purdy's the best quarterback from that class, and he was the last pick in that draft. So they're bad. Pickett needs to be, benched. He's worse than I mean, he's like a Trubisky. And so
Yeah.
that
Oh
game,
yeah.
put in Fields and try to win some football games because I mean, I know you guys are winning games somehow, and you made the playoffs or did they make? Yeah, they made the playoffs this year. But
Yeah.
with Fields, it could be a new dimension to them. And Fields is just an amazing fantasy player.
Oh yeah.
He has his issues. He holds the ball too long, gets sacked. They're not winning him out of games. So, but in a different offense with better weapons, I think Fields, he has that rushing upside as we talked to, a lot of these quarterbacks. So I
Yeah.
like I like that idea for Fields possibly, just see if the Steelers could pull a trigger on that. But moving on to the final six guys that we need to talk about. We're gonna go a little bit faster because there's six more guys. We've already been talking for 50 minutes. So I'm
Yeah.
our next guy, quarterback five, Jordan Love. I expect honestly the same exact season next year and maybe even better. He's got the same unit with him. Got a bunch of young bucks. They're learning more, and now they're going to be another season. He's got four receivers he could throw to. None of them are stars, but maybe one can kind of mold themselves into it. And if not, he's still got four guys to throw to with Reed and Watson and Wicks and what's his name? Reed and Dobbs. Dobbs is good too.
Wicks, Dobbs, and Watson.
And he's still got Aaron Jones. I know AJ Dillon is a free agent, but he wasn't doing much for the team. And so I like Jordan Love going in next year. I think he doesn't have that rushing upside, which makes me, clearly put him under those types of guys like Fields and Lamar and Hurts and Allen. But I like what he's got. I like him over a guy like Tua, even though Tua has, Tyreek with him. So what are your thoughts on Love?
Jordan, I love Jordan Love going into next year. He's had pretty good last part of the season, won a playoff game. Fantasy, he's going to be a baller. Definitely top seven quarterback. I mean, if you can get him in the eighth or ninth round, Justin, that's a steal. Love Jordan Love and the Packers next year to challenge the Lions.
Yeah, and I mean, he's going to go around a guy like CJ Stroud, and I think their numbers next year are going to be kind of similar.
Yeah.
Because like looking back at this year, I mean, Love was very consistent. I'm looking here, what was that, five games under, 20 points in fantasy. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, he was never a super big boom game. He's not giving you 40 points with 400 yards and four scores, but he's giving you, 250 and maybe 2 to 3 touchdowns. So if you're looking for a consistent piece, Love can be that guy for you guys next year, as he showed this year. And I think he's clearly been, he's clearly the guy for, Green Bay. He's their next franchise quarterback. So I don't think he's, at risk of anything like that. So I like him a lot. And he's kind of, he's kind of eerily similar to the next guy, a guy that's not going to run a lot, but he kind of puts up very consistent numbers all the time. It's Brock Purdy, lands himself at 6 quarterback. I mean, we talked about earlier in the episode with Super Bowl recap. He didn't play bad in the Super Bowl. I think he is their franchise quarterback. They didn't lose because of him. He's not
Yeah.
a great quarterback. He's not in that tier of, you know, Mahomes, Lamar, CJ Stroud, stuff like that. But he's good enough to be a franchise quarterback in that system. And I think him still being in that system, he's gonna, put out another pretty solid year. Hopefully they don't get rid of any of their pieces. I know we talked about it. Ayuk might be out of town with some anger, but what are your thoughts on Purdy real quick? If next year is going to be good for him?
Yeah, I'm a little down on the 49ers, as mentioned earlier, but I do like Purdy to have a pretty solid fantasy season, Joe Burrow-esque, season. And, hopefully the 49ers make it back. But I do like Purdy fantasy-wise. I do think, he's learned from rookie year to second year Super Bowl starter. And so, sure, I'm going to give Purdy another shot next year to produce fantasy points and to get the 49ers some valuable wins.
Yeah, that's great. And now moving on to the next guy, it's kind of clear. I feel like we were about to hit a very strict formula from after Lamar Jackson. We've hit a bunch of just pocket passing quarterbacks. And next is Jared Goff on this list. And now I'm going on a little quick tangent just looking at this. I mean, we hit Love and Purdy and now Goff, and the last handful of guys are all pocket passing quarterbacks. this is just like kind of a PSA to everybody listening. If you want to pick a fantasy quarterback, get a guy that runs the ball. If you're trying to pick to win a Super Bowl or a fantasy championship, running quarterbacks are they have the ultimate, upside compared to
Yeah,
a regular passing quarterback. And so a guy that obviously isn't on this list, just kind of a guy I want to throw out, Anthony Richardson next year. He might go a little under the radar. I know people are excited about it, about how he played before he got injured. But that rushing upside, if he gets undervalued at all, don't tell anybody and just scoop him up a little bit ahead of ADP because running quarterbacks, I tell you, I mean, you know it. I mean,
yeah,
you can get a guy like Joe Burrow or next year CJ or Dak Prescott, and they have big games, but they have their low games. If they're not throwing touchdowns, it's
yeah,
very low. But a guy like, Hurts, who we saw have a bad season, he's still putting up very strong numbers, even though he's not throwing a lot of touchdowns. He's running a lot, and that rushing floor really changes the game in fantasy. But anyway,
yeah.
now we're talking about Jared Goff. He lands himself at the seventh best quarterback in the season. He has, a very strong cast of players around him, and Ben Johnson stays. So my thoughts for him are kind of on, it's equal going into next year. They might lose Josh Reynolds. I know he is a free agent, but he was a solid receiver too. But maybe Jamison Williams kind of falls in
Yeah.
and do, a bigger role for the team. Do you have any thoughts on Goff and next season?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jared Goff stays the same. I knew going into the season he was going to be a pretty decent quarterback. He's really good at home. The Lions get into many, many different shootouts. They have a star-studded wide offense now that it might be overtaking the 49ers. They might be better than the 49ers, even though they have Christian McCaffrey. Um, but I do like Jared Goff. Fantasy-wise, I do like the Lions for another NFC title appearance, possibly. But Jared Goff, solid as they come, and maybe Justin he can break that curse for losing their first Super Bowl starts. Maybe Jared Goff can take the Lions for the first time to the promised land.
That would be good. I mean, I know a lot of people are riding the Lions bandwagon because I was too. They're just such a fun
Yeah,
team to kind of, get behind. But yeah,
yeah,
just looking, I mean, you talked about how good he was at home. His road splits is just awful. I don't know what it
yeah,
is. He's not playing in front of his home fans, but I think that's something that is gonna stick. I don't think it's something that will go away next year, just for people that are wondering. And that to me makes him not somebody I want as my quarterback one next year. If I'm really, looking for that title, I'm kind of looking at
yeah,
somebody a little bit better than that. Now, if you're in that camp that where you're like, I'm fine with, kind of not streaming quarterbacks, but just a guy that can get me, a solid 20. Goff could be right up your alley. But we're always looking for upside and kind of trying to hit for the fences. So Goff is a solid guy, kind of will go around this 8 to 12 next year. And we like him. I mean, he has a lot of good players around him, but he doesn't run, but he throws to, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can't ask for a better cast.
yeah.
So I
Stud,
like,
stud.
yeah, he's got such studs around him. And next we go to the Super Bowl MVP. Patrick Mahomes lands himself at 8. Um, Kind of a disappointing fantasy season for him. A lot of people had him at 1
Mhm.
or 2, or even low as 3, but he falls at 8. It is just because of that cast he had. Kelsey had a down regular season. Rice didn't kind of do anything until, halfway through and on. And then the rest of, Kadarius Toney, Mr. Fumble, or he couldn't catch, I mean, more like, and then none of the other guys kind of, sold it. So you're hoping for another person, another wide receiver in there, because if not, I'm probably not touching him because he's still, he's got that name value. He's going to go fairly high,
Oh
but
yeah.
just kind of unreliable in fantasy more and more. But as we talked earlier, if things change in the offseason for the betterment of the offense, then I would like him. Do you have the same thoughts?
You know what, Justin? My early MVP favorite is hands down Patrick Mahomes. This guy cannot be denied. I made the mistake of betting against him. I shouldn't have done it. I have learned my lesson. I did the same with Tom Brady, and I'm learning now with Patrick Mahomes. This guy's going to win the MVP next year, Justin. And you know what? This guy's going to have a Tom Brady, Randy Moss, potential 16-0 type record, type MVP. and he's going to have a fantasy. If I had to predict his stats for next year, I'm going to go 35 total touchdown for Patrick Mahomes with about maybe only 6 to 7 interceptions. I think the Chiefs now, you got to look at it this way, Justin. They had Pacheco, who's a star running back, or not star, but a violent running back, a very good running back. And then, Travis Kelce, I think he's going to be great next year. I'm not going to, turn my back on Travis Kelce until he hangs it up. Rasheed Rice was a great emergence this year. And if they can hit on the draft on a couple more receivers, you got to think that Patrick Mahomes is still happy with winning the Super Bowl, but he's going to look back at the regular season and say, bro, on Christmas Day, I had the most embarrassing game of my life, throwing pick sixes back and forth to the Raiders and at home. So I think Patrick Mahomes is going to digest the season. Once free agency, he's going to be like, hey, give me some wide receivers. I can't do what I did last year. Even though we won the Super Bowl, I want to three-peat this year, and I want to three-peat, cruising, winning games, blowing people out, and playing Patrick Mahomes football when we had Tyreek Hill and we were winning that first Super Bowl. I love the Chiefs too, as well as the Ravens. Add some talent. I know Mahomes loves his talent. And Justin, when you have Andy Reid as your head coach, scheming plays, you're always going to be in it with a talent like Patrick Mahomes, who is now, like I said, a top 2 quarterback, a three-time Super Bowl champion. Justin, it's crazy. This guy just got drafted 7 years ago. I can never forget it. But you know what, Justin? He might be tied at number 1 for fantasy quarterbacks going into next year. I love Patrick Mahomes. I'm never going to doubt him ever again. I have learned my lesson.
Yeah, I mean, you can never count him out. Obviously, football, he is the best quarterback in the game right now. So, I mean, you got to bank on that. He's not going to have a bad season by like him playing poorly. And so,
Mhm.
if we see, they sign, Michael Pittman or T. Higgins or even Hollywood Brown, or they go in the draft with their first round pick and get a guy like Keon Coleman or Brian Thomas, things will, I mean, he'll rise up, the draft boards very quickly. So, yeah, for sure. And now we're on to the ninth quarterback, a guy that to me has kind of had, I know 2 years ago was injury plagued, but he's kind of had two very similar seasons where he starts off very hot. He has two of the best and fastest wide receivers in the league. His name's Tua. I'm getting that Tua. He's got Tyreek and he's got Waddle, and you would think no worries at all. But an injury or two that gets sprinkled in there, and then just I mean, we can all tell he is not a great quarterback. He is a fine quarterback. Uh,
Mhm.
he's kind of crutched by his great two wide receivers that he has. And if they're still there, he's still a viable quarterback to use in fantasy. Somebody that, they never played up to, their competition. And so that makes me, kind of in the same golf train, just like not somebody that I want to count on or want to rely on in big fantasy games, but someone that is a guy you can pick up because he has those monster games with Tyreek Hill. So what are your thoughts on Tua next year and how he, kind of panned out this year?
It's hard for me to really love Tua sometimes. Justin, a fun fact for you, I was an absolute big fan of Tua at the University of Alabama. I loved his walk-off touchdown on the Natty to Devontae Smith. And then, he got to the NFL and his playmaking skills just got a little bit lower. He used to be able to get out the pocket and make pretty good throws. He used to be much, much more accurate in college than he is now. With the Dolphins as a whole, it's just Mike McDaniels, he's a good coach, but can he make the gutsy plays to win big time games, and it's two of that quarterback that can match his skill set and his mindset. I love Mike McDaniels. I think he's a pretty clever, somewhat geeky, funny, nerdy, whatever you want to say. Pretty cool guy. We love his press conferences. But with Tua, it's just I don't know what we're gonna get from him. I don't know when he's gonna have a big game, when he's not gonna have a big game. Now, don't get it twisted. That offense is dynamic. It is all time, all star. I love Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. He said it himself. He's gonna retire in a couple years once his contract's up. So we love Tua. We're gonna pick him in fantasy if he's there. If we have our two good running backs, two receivers, and a star tight end, and maybe if we have four good running backs and three good receivers, Justin, maybe Tua is the great quarterback to pick. As far as winning the division, I still like Buffalo, but hey, Tua can always make a late stretch and make something happen.
And I think it's important to point out that this season they gave Mostert 18 touchdowns on the ground, which is pretty wild and pretty uncommon
Yeah,
for that offense. We would think. So I think that those totals for the running backs might go down in the touchdown department, and maybe Tua get a
yeah,
handful more next season, which could boost up his fantasy totals. So I think that's important to point out. I do think, I mean, if we're talking about division, we know next year the Jets are going to have Aaron Rodgers back. So they're going to be another dangerous team in the division, and maybe
yeah,
Patriots get a guy like Drake May and their whole team kind of turns around, or Jaden Daniels. So there's definitely going to be more competition, but hopefully it's on the offensive side and it makes for more exciting games because we saw two games I think where the Dolphins played against Tyler Boyle and Zach Wilson, and you're not gonna need to throw it a lot in those types of games because you're up by so
yeah.
much because they can't put up any points on the board. So there are definitely going to be some changes. Hopefully, to just becomes more, reliable, throws more, touchdowns because we know
Yeah.
he's not a runner, he's a pocket passer. So, and maybe just becomes more, he can throw it further. Most of those Tyreek touchdowns are kind of underthrown or overthrown. So, kind of get
Yeah.
the money and be good there. And he led the league in passing, so he's not a complete bum. So he has room to grow definitely, and so I like him too, being kind of that low end quarterback one. So we're gonna round out the top 10 with the most exciting player from this past season. I know we're Houstonians, so it's CJ Stroud at number 10. He rounds out the top 10, has a absolutely wonderful rookie season. Some big games throughout the middle of the year. He missed two games due to that concussion that he suffered versus the Jets, and of course, he left that game. But right through a good chunk of the season, he had some very, very big performances. And I think, the only way to go for him is up next year. You have the same thoughts?
Justin, as soon as you said one of the most exciting young players, I knew exactly who you were talking about. And then now that you mentioned CJ Stroud, it lights my face up because, man, as a Texans fan, we have never had a quarterback like this. And I love CJ Stroud going to next year, Justin. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think the Texans can add so many potential talent as we've talked off air, Justin, how who the Texans can get. We love Mike Evans. We love Saquon. We love anybody else, really. You know, it's one of those things like Dwight Howard said a couple years ago. Hey, come over here, come to China, come play, come play. That's what I think about the Texans. Come play with CJ Stroud. You want to come play? Come on. If you're a superstar, come play with CJ Stroud. Come play with CJ Stroud. Come on. This guy's a star, Justin. He's going into next season as a top 5 fantasy and just regular top 5 quarterback, both fantasy. This guy's a stud. Man, I hope he can win for a Super Bowl for himself. I think he can do it for the city of Houston. This guy's a winner. I love this guy. His attitude is the right way, paired up with D'Amico Ryans. I mean, I'm just so proud to be a Texans fan. We've suffered so much. Now we have a guy who is a potential MVP caliber guy who can, I hope, one day win a Super Bowl for us. This guy, I believe in him so much. If we can get a defense, Justin, and an offensive line, we can win any football game with CJ Stroud. If we go to the AFC Championship next year in Kansas City, in Baltimore, Buffalo, Cincinnati, if we have a good O line, I trust CJ to win any game, and I trust him to get to New Orleans with that same way and to win it all. I'm not picking the Texans to win, but I'm saying if that scenario were to come down, I love CJ. We can win any football game with CJ Stroud with the offensive line. I believe it. And I love this guy going into next year. I'm so excited to be a Texans fan. And hey, he's a top 5 quarterback now, Justin. I'm sorry. I'm a little biased. What about you? What do you think, man? What do you think? Come on.
In the entire league, he probably, hits that he's close to that. He's definitely close to that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Definitely right up there, in my opinion. I know he's only played one season, but through one season with a rookie head coach and a rookie play caller, he did so much. They won a division, they won a playoff game. And I mean, looking at it, he didn't have Tank Dell for that last stretch. He gets Tank
Mm-hmm.
Dell back. He has Nico Collins. I know Dalton Schultz is a free agent. They're bringing him back. We've already heard the rumors. They're bringing him back. He was such a great piece. We've heard the rumors of Saquon. I think that's a phenomenal fit. For him and this team. That could be a really great new change. And then for the third receiver, I have a very strong feeling they're going to take the same route that they did with Tank Dell, kind of get a guy on day 2 that could kind of be an upside play. Like I mentioned this guy earlier. I love his film. Malachi Corley for Western Kentucky, or let me think. Another good guy could be what's his name? Xavier Worthy's a really fast guy off the edge. Xavier Leggett's kind of old, but he's been good. So there's definitely pieces on day two that I think they're going to tap into and kind of grab a guy that could be that last piece in the receiver room. So the only way they're going is up. They have some free agents on the defensive side, which I think they have enough money. We have a ton of money, over $50 million to spend next year, so they're set up for just having a great season. I know Anthony Richardson's going to be back, so the division is going to get a little bit more interesting there. And maybe if Brian Callahan pans out well, the Titans can kind of be a better team than they were last season. So competition is going to increase, but their own skill as a team is going to increase as well. So I like CJ
Yeah.
next year. He does fall under that. He doesn't run, but he's a pretty skilled pocket passer. So he kind of falls. He lumped into that group of the last five guys we talked about. But I think he's the best of those five besides Patrick Mahomes. So he's definitely a top 7 fantasy quarterback heading into next season. And so yeah, I like him a lot. I think the people are gonna like him a lot. So hopefully he doesn't go up too high in fantasy drafts to where I got to pull out. But I think Stroud's a great piece. I mean, he won Rookie of the Year for a reason, and he's super accurate and just an all-time performer. So great way to end off the top 10. Just throw out just a couple names next season. Herbert with Jim Harbaugh. Hopefully he turns in a good season. We spoke about Fields a little bit earlier. Even in Chicago, he'll be a top 10, top 12
Yeah.
fantasy quarterback. And if he goes to another team, he will too. Atlanta, we've heard, of course, Las Vegas or Pittsburgh. So all of them, I think Fields, wherever he lands, he's going to be a good fantasy piece. I'm not sure if any of the rookie quarterbacks heading in are, somebody that I'm interested as a quarterback one. Jaden Daniels with that rushing upside, as well as Caleb Williams. But we spoke about how Chicago's kind of just an iffy place to kind of put my pick on, even though they have DJ Moore and they're probably going to get a guy like Rome Odunze in the draft with the 9th pick. So it's kind of back and forth. Caleb Williams maybe could be a good draft pick. But I love Herbert, of course, and Fields. Russell Wilson will be on a new team. Hopefully he gets somewhere good. Another guy, a guy I'm worried about that had a very good season this past year is Baker Mayfield. Losing
Hmm.
Dave Canales kind of makes me a little bit off of him. And if Mike Evans leaves, definitely be off of him. So Baker Mayfield's kind of on my stock down list if we had one. So there's that. Trevor Lawrence too. Kind of hopefully he puts up a good season, trying to live up to that number one pick name, which he really hasn't yet. But Calvin Ridley is a free agent, so we'll see where that is. But yeah, that kind of wraps up our episode, everybody. So we covered the top 10 quarterbacks from the fantasy season, some pieces that we think could be, headed up and headed down as well. We talked about the Super Bowl, as you heard, big game, biggest game of the year. Was a very electrifying game, and we just loved it. And now we're in off-season mode. We're headed for 6 months of no football, but just a ton of football things that we're definitely going to discuss. Next week we got to jump into the running backs because there's just a lot of running backs and a lot of running back changes that are headed for next year with a lot of free
Hmm.
agents and a so-so running back class in the draft. So definitely some names are going to come up next week, and stay tuned. Dween Sports is always at it. This is our episode for the week. Genoa, send us out. Dween Nation, see ya.
Yo, Dewey Nation, so excited to get into this offseason, man. This is about to be a crazy offseason with the draft and free agency. So, Justin, I cannot wait to discuss with you every step of the way leading back to fantasy season. I'm ready for the summer, Justin. I'm so ready for that July, August time. We're running mock drafts. We're picking a couple leagues and then our couple main drafts, Justin. I'm so excited. And it starts next week with next week's episode. I'm so excited for the offseason, Justin. I can't wait.
That's right. All right, Dween Nation, y'all have a good day and peace out.